Hey guys, it's Luke Johnson from Noetic, the Philosophy, Humanities, Poetry teaching app. We're back with Charles Clifford Brooks III for another installment of poetry analysis, and I'm just going to let him do what he does. What are we going to be hearing from you today, Cliff?
We will be covering the brilliant Carl Sandburg. And I will open with a poem I've read previously on this show called Fog, a very short piece. And the other one is rather short too, that's called Autumn Movement. Carl Sandburg, again, and what made me think about him more in depth was when we were talking about Wallace Stevens last week, is that in the idea of fame in a writer's or creator's lifetime, typically from what I can see, and I first mentioned it last week, that it is derived from their train wreck of a cliche life. How much could they make the news? How many times could they fall over drunk? How many times could they kill themselves too early or from some disease from not wearing the right clothes outside because they were being dramatic or whatever? Both Wallace Stevens and Carl Sandburg within their own lifetimes were well-respected, successful in their own right, however you ever want to see that. But they found the key, and that is to not be a cliche. Carl Sandburg, E.E. Cummings, Wallace Stevens, William Carlos Williams. There's a quiet brood of these particular souls that have almost said, shh, just don't even talk about it. They'll talk about us in class, they'll remember us, but don't make a big deal about it. What we remember typically in artists as we talk about fame are those most unattractive, undesirable traits and actions. And it's one of those problematic truths that can be easily undone. It's the rule of anybody, I think, no matter what vocation you're in, is to not embarrass your mama. You know, was it Kant who said the best way to figure out what is good and what is bad is that if you won't do it in front of your closest friends, if you won't do it in front of them and it makes you embarrassed, don't do it. I remember thinking philosophy is not, I mean, it's just open truth. It's just, you know what, like my mama said, my mama's name is Jeanette. And she says, it's not what would Jesus do to you, it's what would Jeanette do to you. I mean, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And I am not, to this day, I'm behaving. At any rate, Carl Sandburg, who my mama is a big fan of as well, Carl Sandburg is most famous for his 6-volume biography on Abraham Lincoln. But at his home, I believe in North Carolina, he lived with his wife, who was a goat farmer. He made his own money, but people would take tours of the farm while he was studying. Both of them lived there. And they'd come back and they would say, ma'am, you've got this naked man walking up on rocks up there. She's like, yeah, that's my husband. And I thought to myself, that's what's up. That's what's up. It's not that artists at the same time are fragile, inept creatures that can't deal with the real world. The real world is just by and large the place that's not suitable sometimes. Not a judgment call. I would just rather be walking away from the whole world naked up on some rocks too, in the sun, being warm, all to myself with some goats, and my lovely wife, you know. Carl Sandburg was a newspaper man. He was a traveler, as many of us are, whether we do it literally or figuratively. He was not restless. Actually, while he lived in North Carolina, Bob Dylan came and saw him out of the blue before he changed his name. And to imagine yourself as a fly on the wall or just sitting in the room with Carl Sandburg and Bob Dylan. You know, Carl Sandburg's like, man, I don't know what we're going to do. And then Bob Dylan's like, Ziminy, my bass, think, big hand, think. No, I don't know. I'm just playing, Bob. I'm just playing. But everybody must. But it's you got to laugh. You got to laugh. But it's Carl Sandburg again. Carl Sandburg was a proponent of the visceral theater of poetry, is what I like to think of it. He used very few words. He was one of those men who, it's just like, again, he would take a scalpel without hitting the bone, without wasting any sentiment. Perfect grammar. I'm telling you, man, if somebody can use a semicolon at the end times when the zombies come, I'll let you in my camp. If you can use a semicolon correct, and he, you know, it's just, again, the function and the idea, the form, I have fallen in love again with his work, and there's so much to love there. And it's just, I mean, I cannot say enough, not just because I think so, because if I'm wrong, please, you know, you can comment all you want to on how I'm wrong. But these poets I've picked are not accessible in that they're easy. No, they're just accessible. And that's what intelligent writing is. That's what intelligent anything is. You know, when people are afraid that philosophy is too complicated, philosophy was the one vocation who had literature that they wanted to be understood widely. Because it's like, hey, I got a pretty good idea on how you can't act stupid. I just got some new rules. I think some ideas you might want to hold. But you don't have to. You don't have to. It's in layman's terms because that's the way we understand things. It's how we take small words that everyone understands. And I love vocabulary, so if I'm looking through and that one just isn't right, I'll go find another one. But it's using, again, and Chaucer kicked that all off with Canterbury Tales. I mean, he took it and said, well, y'all, you can be smart, but I want to make some money. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. And Chaucer did it well. And from that point on, we're like, you know what? If we wrote in a language that people could understand, I bet more people would buy our books. Genius! No, marketing. So Carl Sandburg was looking out over the bay one time. I believe he wrote this poem, Fog, when he was out in the Midwest. And I can see him. He's a very quiet man, sitting on the bank, looking out over the river. And if you've ever seen fog roll in, number one, it's creepy, and it reminds me of every horror movie I've ever seen. But I guess there is a peacefulness to it. And he encapsulates it in very few lines with very few words in a poem called Fog. The fog comes on little cat feet. It sits looking over harbor and city on silent haunches and then moves on. I love that. I don't know if it's official yet, but I've kind of always dubbed those types of poems like snapshot poems. It's just a moment. You know, you don't have to have this whole derived story ready. Sometimes it just is a photograph instead of a whole album. And so again, fog. The fog comes on little cat feet. Cats are the devil, by the way. That's not in the poem, but I just want to let you know that they will eat you if you die. Anyway, fog. The fog comes on little cat feet. It sits looking over harbor and city on silent haunches and then moves on. And then we come to the core of today's lesson, autumn movement. I cried over beautiful things, knowing no beautiful thing lasts. The field of cornflower yellow is a scarf at the neck of the copper sunburned woman. The mother of the year, the taker of the seeds. The northwest wind comes and the yellow is torn full of holes. New beautiful things come in the first spit of snow on the northwest wind. And the old things go. Not one lasts. Every time I read it, it insists upon a pause of respect, of allowing it to sift over you. The one line that kicks it off, that stands by itself, I cried over beautiful things, knowing no beautiful thing lasts. It carries a twang or maybe a slight sting of nothing, not all things green or gold, or, at some point, I think life moves on. But he shows immediately, again, with this beautiful imagery of the sunburned woman and the copper neck, the fields, the color of that, which is where redneck came from, y'all, but I'm not saying he said that here. The mother of the year, the taker of the seeds, it's a person, it's the actual field, it's the literal taker of the seeds of life, as a woman is before they give birth. So few words in his deliberate use of function and sound. The northwest wind. He repeats that word, and it's one of the only ones that he does. And especially in poetry, I have found that if a poet uses a word more than once, pay attention to why they use that word again. Because typically, especially in poetry, it's more glaringly obvious. On one side, I always like it because it's a challenge and makes you push yourself to not use the same words over and over. But in doing so, it makes sure that if you use the same word twice again, it'll make people notice, and it'll make them wonder why. It always draws me back to when I was living in Athens, Georgia. Hoorah! And with my daddy's folks, and the worst ice storm in the world, or at least that we had seen in Athens, came through. And Daddy said, when the wind blows by the northwest, it's gonna snow. I'm like, what kind of voodoo stuff is that, dude? When I tell you it iced so bad, I thought I was gonna have to kill a child and eat it. I was looking at my window like a lion in the pride on Serengeti, like, That little fat one better move quick because I'm going to pick him off last. Again, it's just in that, whether or not you find that particularly funny, good literature does that. I don't know exactly what Carl Sandburg was thinking, and I'm not going to do him the offense of saying that I do. But it makes me realize and relive these fantastic moments. And looking back during periods of time that while I was in it, it was not fun at all. But now realizing getting to a point in life where I'm not lost in a dark wood, don't have it all figured out, but I'm not lost in a dark wood, that I can sit here and reflect on poetry. Not because it's a frivolous thing, but because it's an essential thing. And I feel lucky, and I feel grateful that I was able to come into this program when I was at more of a even keel disposition. But the second stanza, the northwest wind comes and the yellow is torn full of holes. And again, it echoes destruction. But that's evolution. That's advancement. It's the idea of the phoenix. The old guard must burn for the new to be rebuilt. Torn full of holes, new beautiful things come in the first spit of snow on the northwest wind. And old things go. Not one lasts. And again, you see the words like spit. It's spit is not, again, it's not a very, sorry, go ahead. It's not a very attractive word, but when you see snow come down the first time before it gets really cold, it looks like that. You literally can see that happen. And again, it does. It's like that. Those spits of snow fill in those holes from where the wind is torn off the top of the plants there. It makes you understand and see nature. And I don't know how, and this is just me, how you can have any realism, any tangible virtue in your creations if you don't have a firm personal knowledge of nature. Not the nature of man, but the nature of creation, of going out and putting your hands on something real. That's why I suggest that everyone do some kind of lawn care or grow something, because it makes you stop. It's a very Buddhist idea, but it makes you pause. And reading poetry is much the same way. People. I'm a huge proponent of memorizing poetry. One, it'll stave off things like dementia and Alzheimer's, but at the same time, it gives you those songs. And so they're almost like prayers for me. And I'll whisper them to myself in times of stress and strife, and it immediately calms me down, because there's a spirituality in poetry. There's the same that's in music. It's at a much more somber tone sometimes. The more I've gone along, the fewer notes space between poetry and songs I've seen in those genres. And that notion came to me when my first book came out, and the first folks to really latch on were musicians, asking me, have you ever thought about turning that poem into a song? And that's when it finally clicked in me how it was that I wrote poetry. I may have mentioned this before, that it's much like how a composer puts notes on a line. And that was a revelation to me, and allowed me to get my, again, your creation sometimes becomes, and people say Frankenstein, but that's not right, because Frankenstein was the name of the doctor, not the monster. But I'm not going to get super nerdy on you. And Moby Dick is the best book ever. But with Carl Sandburg, again, he was one of those men that was very quiet and thoughtful, and did not talk like a machine gun. But he was a very kept guy. He didn't have a whole lot of friends, but he was not misanthropic, and he was not a recluse. Anybody who writes, who paints, who takes photos, the one essential part of our vocation is that solitude. And it's not detrimental. I need those real good friends around me that when I do get too deep into that solitude, they'll come up and say, like, hey, cousin, what's up? When's the last time you ate? When's the last time you slept? When's the last time you clothed? Because you're starting to turn, Clifford. You need those people to understand that quiet that you don't always get enough of, but when you do, it's like precious metal. For me, when people ask, what's the ritual for you getting ready to create your own poetry, I don't really read poetry per se, because I'm terrified that I'll somehow inadvertently transfer some idea or some sentiment too close to what I was reading. When I write, I eschew really everything from my own personal reading, because I don't want to contaminate and seem to be stealing. But classical music, I'll always play Beethoven, Moonlight Sonata. It's my favorite song in the world. But then, Mozart's Requiem, Vivaldi's Four Seasons, anything by Bach. Bach started it all. Anyway, the classical music, this the idea, again, the quintessential example of how did hundreds of years ago somebody sit down and write a melody like this poem that has these sounds without words, very much unlike this poem. That if I played Moonlight Sonata, or if I played Feu Elise, and I said, what do you think that's about? And especially Moonlight Sonata, people would say, sadness. It makes me sad, but I'm comfortable in that. It's how is that possible? It's because something greater than us. And anybody who loves what they're doing in any vocation, when you love what you're doing, that same energy is talking straight through you. And that's why you glow. That's why you smile. That's why you again, it's true. And I found this out more than anything else. Like Carl Sandburg and his goat farm existence with a wife that he loved dearly and she loved him, to be so cool that Bob Dylan just rolls up and knocks on your door. Hey man, let me in. It's cold down here. No. So it's revelatory, really, in a way. We're about to come on autumn. Thank you, God, because if I have one more day of 90-something degree heat and I got to work out in the yard, I'm going to start slapping kids and old people for no reason. But autumn movement is a prayer for me. I cried over beautiful things, knowing no beautiful thing lasts. On a personal note, it's like looking back over all the construction and sacrifice that was well worth it to create the Southern Collective experience and everything that I'm seeing now. It comes to fruition. But again, along the way, I didn't step and cheat anybody. But along the way, you saw things that at the time you thought, oh man, I'm going to miss that. But you have to hollow yourself out. You have to shuck away preconceptions and unknown prejudices in order to have space for wisdom that opens new doors. And it's discipline. It's I know it sounds strange coming out of me, and I have many friends going, what did he just say? But it's discipline and it's dedication. The same thing is with anything that lasts, that does last. But it will not last the same way that it is now. Sooner or later, I'm going to shuffle off this rock. But it's almost a line, and Mama, I swear I will not do it, but you could make it a tattoo. I cried over beautiful things, knowing no beautiful thing lasts. It's not sad to me. What it says to me is appreciate it while you have it, while it's in your hands. Enjoy every day as every day comes. All we know is what is around us. And we all know the philosophy about what's real. Was it, experience, or is it tangible? Either way, we have a paradise in front of us. And it's not to be tied up in fear. It's to be more like the poem Fog. To not be like a cat, because cats are evil. They'll eat your soul. But anyway, to be like that gentle creature that kind of rolls in, that assesses the moment, the smell, the sounds, the taste, the faces, the laughter. Dismissing the negative, not in any naive way, but just because that's not luggage you want to carry. And then slowly back to your haunches, and then gracefully exit the room. With this poem, it comes much the same way. There is a story told. There is a journey taken, but it's a very short one. It's more like going to the gas station versus going, to Athens from here in North Georgia. But being correct on the direction of the wind, and when you talk about nature, know what you're talking about. It's obvious that Carl Sandburg was well versed in what he talked about. That you would, that you hear his poetry, and not just because you like him, but because of his specificity of word use. He would take a scalpel and cut the words just to the bone, but not into it, wasting nothing. Never saying really or very, never a lot. It's not a word, people. But the northwest wind comes and the yellow is torn full of holes. New beautiful things come in the first spit of snow on the northwest wind, and the old things go. Not one lasts. And it's been echoed, and I won't bore you or the listening public with all the Ozymandias parallels here, because again, all of us want to be remembered when we're not around anymore. But how do you want to be remembered? What things about you do you want remembered? And it can't be stressed over in the moment. You have to be as good of a person as you can be, as you understand it. And part of that is surrounding yourself with positive, giving, but firm people in your life that you call friends. And these are sentiments, these are ideas that have glanced and glazed through me over the years. But as I sit and read these poems and take a moment to let it soak in, and it actually has stoked my own creative fires, I have found its own faith, its own religion in art that is not in any way an adversary or a wave against any kind of practical, not traditional, practical dogma of any use. And in all actuality, it's kind of right there with the same idea, you know, of being happy, of being joyous that you're here. Live today for the day, planning for tomorrow. An asteroid probably won't hit this planet. We might have another NASA disaster like that we had this week. Way to go. We weren't even trying to launch it. We were just cranking it up and boom. No. Anyway, 9/11 coming up, you know, again, it's, you know, the 15th year since that's gone by, and I'm writing now. I just finished an essay for another magazine on where I was at that moment. When you use words, words stick, words stay, they last. Their echo has a corporeal hum to it. Just like I said, you know, many people say, I'd rather you punch me in the face than cut me emotionally, because you can't salve that emotion. That one thing, you know, Ben Harper saying that good lovers make great enemies because you know exactly what to say to make the other one hurt. That's too easy. Whether you're writing it down, push to be bigger than that. Push to be Carl Sandburg, naked, warm on a rock, about to walk down, put some pants on, and chill out with Bob Dylan for the afternoon. With a wife who loved him dearly, who was a very practical woman. She herded goats. Goats are nasty. No offense to anybody, but they smell. I'm not a farmer, so maybe that's, you know, maybe that's my thing. But you know, the more I read about him and his life and his storytelling and the people that he considered heroes and his education and his own education, self-education perpetuating once he left school, I just ended up building in myself a new respect for these people. So, I mean, again, if you can hit me up, or, you know, Luke will be able to pass on notes. Please, just, Luke loves it when you call him and send him all kinds of emails, you know, hating. But no, don't do that. We have a real good friendship going on here. But no, it's seriously, all these, you know, if you like these poems and you go read more of them, I try to find a poem or an example that really kind of echoes, you know, it's there like a voice, but something that you've not heard all the time. Now, in the weeks to come, I will be reading a passage from Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, and I'm going to parallel it with some work by Rilke. He kind of does the same thing of the vastness of experience. But I'm going to have to find a day when there's maybe a little more time to go. And I know that's what all the listeners are thinking, like, yay, just some more time to hear Cliff talk. But today, Fog, Autumn Movement. Again, the poem being about movement, the movement of a symphony. No matter any way that you want to see the double entendre, whether he meant it to be there or not is not important. What's important is, did you feel full when you left the table? And I certainly hope you did today.
Thank you very much, Cliff. It'll be on the Noetic app momentarily. Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Take care.